Coming up on the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast.
When I started training more for performance, what I found was that not only did my performance get better with a wider array of foods, especially including a lot more fruits and vegetables into the diet, but my body composition was better too. And that made the diet a lot more enjoyable. And so my stick-to-itiveness or the sustainability of the diet was much better because I had one of the things that happens, particularly with fruit, is if you're eating poorly routinely, and you're routinely indulging in cookies and cakes and sweets and sodas and all that kind of stuff, an orange doesn't really taste like a treat. But when you get off of that stuff for a while and you're dialing back on all the kind of the junk food in terms of the cookies and snack cakes or whatever, ice cream or whatever it is that's your vice, all of a sudden an orange and an apple or a bowl full of grapes, those sorts of things, they start to taste a lot more satisfying. And they become almost like a treat. And so that was one of the things for me was just include a lot more fruits and vegetables. Didn't have any negative impact on, body fat. In fact, I think it helped.
Hello, and welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I'm Brian Grin, and I'm here to give you actionable tips to get your body back to what it once was 5, 10, even 15 years ago. Each week, I'll give you an in-depth interview with a health expert from around the world to cut through the fluff and get you long-term sustainable results. This week, I interview gym owner, strength and conditioning coach, and former professional powerlifter, Andy Baker. He also co-authored 2 books, Strength Training for Life After 40 and Practical Programming for Strength Training. We discussed what Andy learned from powerlifting and dieting, along with the magic of setting a timeline for reaching your goals, foods to help performance in the gym, proper programming to build muscle, the importance of consistent rest between sets, and his one tip to get your body back to what it once was. Really enjoyed my interview with Andy. I know you will too. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Grin and I have Andy Baker on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Where are you coming from? I forgot to ask.
I am in Kingwood, Texas, which is about 30 miles north of Houston. So
okay.
Out of Texas. Yeah.
And how long you've been there for?
I more or less lived here my whole life. Brief stint out in California when I was in the Marine Corps, but more or less lived in Houston my whole life, and had my gym here since 2007. So I've had that going for
that's great. About,
wow. What is that? 14 years, 15 years, something like that.
More than that.
Yeah.
17.
Coming up on 17 years. Yeah. So that keeps me busy. That's it's good place to live other than the summertime when it's 3 months straight of 105 and 90% humidity. But other than that, great city.
Right. Well, that's like us. In Chicago, you get the 3 months of negative, and snow and
wind and
wind. Yeah, exactly. Although it's been very mild, so I don't want to.
Yeah.
That. But maybe explain to the audience a little bit about your background. I know you've been in strength and conditioning industry since like 2001, and so what sort of led you down that path into opening a gym and everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got hooked on lifting at an early age. Like most kids, like kind of dovetailed with like playing sports and that sort of thing. But the first time I touched a barbell, I think I was 12 or 13 years old. And I was hooked, from the first time I laid hands on one. So, the journey started for me, very early. And once I got involved with it, I was, pretty well obsessed with it, and, lifted all through high school and, got really heavily into the bodybuilding side of things, during my college years. And then, kind of always knew that I studied exercise science at Texas A&M, and pretty much always knew I wanted to go this route, but wasn't exactly sure what avenue I wanted to go down. Originally, when I started my studies, academically, I wanted to work as a strength and conditioning coach, like at the university level, working with athletes and that sort of thing. But you kind of get into that world a little bit, and it's not it's not as awesome as you think it is from the outside. Certain realities, just like a lot of things, certain realities of the dream job,
Right.
make it not the dream job. And so, started having my eye on, doing my own thing, having my own facility. So that kind of came into fruition. It's a long story, but kind of came into fruition in late 2007. And opened the gym and primarily started working with athletes. Again, that's who I wanted. That was my interest at the time. As a young trainer, young coach, was working with high school and college athletes. So first several years that I was in operation, that was mainly who I was working with. But over time, it just kind of snowballed into, working with, a lot of it started with just working with these kids' parents, that started coming in. So you got these high school, college age kids and stuff. And they're seasonal. So you're working with them for the summertime and maybe a few weeks over Christmas, maybe a little bit at spring break, especially if they're going to school somewhere, not within driving distance or whatever. So, you wind up just with the adults in the area and the kids' parents and all that stuff coming into the gym. And so I found myself in a place where I had about 50% athletes that I was working with and 50% just, kind of regular people in the gym, moms and dads and grandparents, people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I've had clients all the way up into their 80s, still do. So kind of working on both sides of that spectrum. So, and I've, more or less just maintained that again for like the last 17 years, of just bringing strength and conditioning to a pretty wide diverse group of people. So keeps it interesting, keeps it fun, and sharpens your skill set for sure.
Yeah, and I noticed from your website in 2010 you competed in nationals, right?
Yeah. I was I was never super passionate about powerlifting, but it was something that I kind of early in my career, it was something I was definitely into in the competitive side of powerlifting. I was working with powerlifters. That was kind of part of the business side that I was working with. I was working with powerlifters. And so I felt like to a degree I needed to be competing as well if I was going to go down that route. I had some ability. I wasn't, I wasn't elite level, but I was good. I was okay. And I enjoyed it for a while, but like a lot of those types of competitive sports, as you get into your late 20s and early 30s and, the demands of business and you start cranking out kids and that sort of thing, it just becomes where you kind of have to make a decision of how much time and effort and money can I invest into this, what is essentially a hobby,
Sure.
to do, with, if you're going to go on to win, the world championships, it's a different thing. But yeah, right. I had some limited success with powerlifting, and I learned a lot through competing, as much about the training of the building of the strength, for the competitions and that sort of thing for myself, but also, powerlifting is a weight class sport. And so the diet is very important in that you have to show up on game day weighing a certain amount. And you obviously want to show up, if you're going to compete like I did in the 198 pound weight class, that means you can't go over 198. So that you would like to, if possible, weigh 197, 198 and have as much of that be muscle mass and the least amount of it be body fat. I mean, that's generally the guy that wins the meet is the guy that carries the most amount of muscle and the least amount of body fat in that weight class. So the diet and everything is very important. A lot of people don't realize that because they look at some of the super heavyweight powerlifters, and then it's a little less important because you've got guys weighing, 300, 308 plus or whatever. But then it's not as important to really watch how your body fat level and that sort of thing. But that's changing a little bit in modern day powerlifting. You're starting to see guys that are starting to understand it's not necessarily the heaviest guy that wins, it's the guy with the most amount of muscle mass that wins. So and generally heavier guys do carry more muscle, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So the diet portion has entered into the powerlifting world in a big way over the last decade or so, in a way that when I was coming up, 20, 30 years ago, it was more kind of powerlifting was, bodybuilding. That was where dieting took place. Powerlifting was more of the seafood diet. You just ate everything in sight and hope to get stronger, which it does work, but it doesn't always lead to the most favorable body composition. So that was a big, the competition powerlifting that I did in the early 2000s was very helpful for me, if for nothing else, just for my own education in terms of the training, but especially the diet part of it.
Yeah. And what you learned from that, how did you translate that over to just like general population individuals who are looking to just get stronger?
Well, it's what would work, what works for a competitive athlete is going to work for the general population as well. It's really nothing's really different. It's just a matter of degree. How strict do you have to be? When you have to weigh a certain amount on a certain date, then you got to be pretty strict. There's not a whole lot of room for cheat meals and going off schedule and that sort of thing. And you don't have a lot of, if you mess it up for a couple of weeks, you don't have a lot of time to dial back the clock and kind of undo it. I think the harder part actually, and this applies to training as well as diet. I think the harder part about working with a general population is that there isn't always necessarily a timeline. They don't, you may arbitrarily set one, but there's a magic that happens with competition in that you have a set date. Mm-hmm. Like I have to be ready to go on this date, and that will get you in shape. Whether you're doing for a triathlon or powerlifting meet or bodybuilding competition, having that date on the calendar where you risk, either not performing well or, embarrassment by showing up out of shape and not ready to go, or disappointment with yourself. It's very much a form of accountability to have that date on the calendar to make you stick to your diet. It's very, very easy when working with the general population to kind of, when things kind of unravel a little bit on them, it's like, well, what's the hurry? What's the rush? They don't have it. There's no date on the calendar to hold them accountable. And that makes it a little bit harder. Even if you do set a date, we kind of, as the coach and as the athlete, they kind of both know it's arbitrary, right? Like you don't actually kind of show up in front of a bunch of people and have to lift in a singlet or whatever. Right. So, or pose on stage. So I do think that goal setting with the general population is important, and goal setting, I think, as we both know, that includes a timeline. It's not just, I want to lose 20 pounds or whatever, but I want to lose 20 pounds by when. And again, even if it needs to be realistic, obviously, but I think having these, even if they're arbitrary goals on calendar, help to keep people accountable. That way, when somebody has a bad weekend, oh man, I really messed up Friday through Sunday. My diet was totally off track or whatever. We don't let that bad weekend turn into a week and then turn into a month, right? Because we kind of agreed on this day. Like you can get away with, oh man, I really messed up today, or even I really messed up this whole weekend. But when you start having the weekends turn into weeks, turn into months of, being off track on your eating and your discipline, then that's where things really unravel. And you have the clients that keep having to go back to square one to start back over again and again. So I think, that would be number one is trying to get people to put some pressure on themselves to an extent with having some hard dates of when to accomplish these goals. And those can be adjusted. Those can be, like you say, it's not set in stone, but it is helpful to make sure that things are accomplished in a reasonable timeline, and this process isn't dragged out forever. In terms of the nuts and bolts of dieting, one of the things that, coming from a bodybuilding background at the time, a lot of the stuff that I was familiar with, a lot of the coaches and the sources that I was familiar with on the diet side of things were not everything. Everything was like basically at that level. It was chicken and rice.
I was just going to say that
it's just chicken and rice, and which is, rice is a great source of carbs. It digests easily for most people. It doesn't have a lot of accompanying fat. Chicken's cost for the same reason. It's a high quality source of protein, easy to digest, doesn't have a lot of fat with it. So, chicken and rice, obviously there's a reason why bodybuilders do that. It's not just legend. It's an effective way to train, but it's not, I think, long term, it's not really sustainable for most people to be that restrictive. And so one of the things that opened up, when I was dieting, was that I included a lot more fruits and vegetables. And there was kind of this weird thing with fruit in the bodybuilding world for years, that you couldn't eat you couldn't eat fruit. Fructose was,
Right.
banned, and it was a different type of sugar that would convert more easily to body fat. And so I just, I didn't have any formal training or education on this. I went along with what everybody else did, and vegetables were kind of seen as like this thing that was like, well, yeah, they're probably good for you, but you don't really need them, so they're kind of optional. And when you're when like with bodybuilding, when you're having to eat 5, 6, 7 times a day, you actually get tired of eating. So like you don't necessarily want to include vegetables if they're seen as optional or whatever. But when I started training more for performance, what I found was that not only did my performance get better with a wider array of foods, especially including a lot more fruits and vegetables into the diet, but my body composition was better too. And that made the diet a lot more enjoyable. And so my stick-to-itiveness, or the sustainability of the diet, was much better, because I had a one of the things that happens, particularly with fruit, is if you're eating poorly, routinely, and you're routinely indulging in cookies and cakes and sweets and, sodas and all that kind of stuff, an orange doesn't really taste like a treat. But when you get off of that stuff for a while, and you're dialing back on all the kind of the junk food in terms of the cookies and snack cakes or whatever, ice cream or whatever it is that's your vice, all of a sudden an orange and an apple or a bowl full of grapes, those sorts of things, they start to taste a lot more satisfying. And they become almost like a treat. And so that was one of the things for me, was just include a lot more fruits and vegetables. Didn't have any negative impact on, body fat. In fact, I think it helped. I think it helps with digestion to have a better, certainly the fiber, but also just a more varied, source of foods, so that you've got a better kind of biome in the gut in terms of digestive enzymes and that sort of thing, of not just eating the same stuff over and over and over again. So, and also varying up protein sources too, more fish and lean beef and stuff like that, and not just chicken or rice all the time. So I try to build that in for my clients, as well as giving them, when I help people with nutrition, to go along with their training plan, is, making sure that we're allotting room in there for enough fruits and vegetables for all of the reasons, they're a great carb source, all the micronutrients and fiber and that sort of stuff, but also to help people stick to the diet a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot there. I think that's a good point regarding diet, is like how sustainable can it be for the long term? And I mean, you're seeing this a lot, and I'm sure you probably run into, like, obviously, like carnivores or people that are sort of extreme one way or the other. And I feel like it can be good, maybe perhaps in the short term, especially if you're getting off sort of like the standard American diet.
Yeah. I agree. It does work. I mean, but lots of stuff, like when you cut out entire food groups or entire macros, completely cut out fat, completely cut out carbs. I mean, you're reducing calories, just simply by cutting out, even if you're not counting calories, you are in effect reducing them by cutting out, tons of food groups. The carnivore thing, it is harder to overeat on meat versus, highly processed carbohydrates. So if you're just telling somebody the only thing you can have is meat, well, you're going to limit the amount of calories they eat. You're cutting out carbohydrates completely, but you're also eating a highly satiating type of food that is, you're not going to sit there, and people don't just sit there and eat, one chicken breast after another while they're watching TV. Sure. That's just not, so they fill up faster. So, but like you said, is it sustainable and is it healthy? I can't really I've dieted down to pretty low body fats, and I can't be convinced that eating just meat at the exclusion of, say, green vegetables is better. I mean, I've gotten down to extremely low body fats, basically eating proteins and green vegetables, broccoli, green beans. I mean, I don't see a compelling reason to exclude things like that from the diet, unless it's just strictly a form of psychological, for the adherence of, look, you can have this one food group and that's it. Like you said, sure. It's kind of an extreme measure to kind of recalibrate people that are really, really unhealthy, and are really off the, really maybe struggling with even, mild food addictions or whatever, to really kind of go the other way. I'm not, like you said, I'm not necessarily opposed to that if that's what it takes to get somebody really out of that bad space, physically, mentally, and emotionally. It may take, there to a degree, in a lot of things, moderation doesn't, you say everything in moderation. That's not necessarily true. I mean, that doesn't work for an alcoholic. As somebody that's really, really, really struggled with alcohol addiction their whole lives, they can't just, 99% of them are never going to be able to handle alcohol in moderation, for whatever reason. It just doesn't work. So certain people with, I think with, what we would call food addictions and things like that, there is a case to be made from abstinence from certain food groups, that people, if it routinely leads you down the wrong path, it doesn't work with nicotine. I've had my own struggles with nicotine on and off for 20 something years. And I can tell you, I mean, it's one chew or one cigarette. That's it. You go right back to it. It doesn't, everything in moderation does not work for addiction. And so if people are that far down that route, then it may help to follow something of abstinence. But I think the thing with food, the difference is with alcohol, with nicotine, with drugs, you don't have to have those things. You don't have to drink. You don't have to dip or smoke. You don't have to do drugs. You have to eat. And so you have to figure out how can we get this person back? Maybe short term, we're doing something to try to get 25 pounds off this guy to fix his insulin sensitivity, to maybe give him some positive momentum. Wow. Okay. Because if you do something extreme and you can get 25, 30 pounds off of somebody really fast, that's going to give them some positive psychological momentum that can carry them forward. And then you have that conversation later on of, okay, look, we've been doing this thing for a while. Like, we got to start kind of maybe thinking about getting you back to a more, quote, normal diet so that you can function better in society. Typically, if you have a family and stuff like that too, it's really hard to do those types of extreme diets and still kind of participate in what's, quote, normal family life. I mean, are you going to subject your kids and your wife and everybody to strictly eating meat just because that's your choice? Right. It's like, so, getting people back into introducing some of those foods it's starting with, I would say, vegetables and fruit as number one, and kind of going down that route. So,
have you found, like, the way you've eaten? I mean, how's that affected how you've performed in the weight room, and like when you've excluded certain things or included certain things? How do you dial that in?
Yeah. So I think part of it is, this is one of the things when I was powerlifting of including a lot more fruits and vegetables and things like that. I think when you're healthy, it helps to improve obviously being fit improves your health, but I also think being healthy kind of improves your fitness. I think everything in your body operates better when you're giving your body everything that it needs to perform all of its functions, whether it's digestion or, regulating body fat or building muscle mass and all that kind of stuff is, yes, it's what we think of kind of the protein and the carbs, but I think just everything operating as it should be by providing your body with the right amount of micronutrients and fibers and all that kind of stuff is going to make you perform better. I certainly had much better energy, not just strength, but energy to train when I'm sticking to the diet. My sleep is better. And so that has a huge impact on performance in the gym or any other sport is sleep. So when your sleep is regulated, when you're waking up with more energy, you're not waking up, dog ass tired because you ate a bunch of carbs, a bunch of cookies and stuff right before you went to bed. When I eat like that, I always wake up, feeling sluggish and, not so great. But when you wake up feeling refreshed because you had a good night's sleep, and so that has a huge impact. And I think your recovery is better. So you're hitting those weights hard and heavy, you're breaking down a lot of muscle, you're creating a lot of muscle damage. You need the digestion to be well, because the thing is, it's not, especially like when you're eating a seafood diet, where you're just eating everything in sight. What I kind of liken it to, and I have a friend in the business, Nathan Payton, that kind of led me on to this analogy. It's like trying to fill up a drinking glass with a garden hose, and it's, or with a fire hose, it's like, it's overkill when you're just trying to cram all that food in there. So you're eating a lot of food, but like what I would say, it's not necessarily how much you eat, it's how much you utilize. Or it's how much you use. So just cramming in calorie after calorie after calorie, your body can only use so much of that for recovery. It can only digest so much of that efficiently. So learning how to eat cleaner, learning how to eat, smaller meals broken up more, rather than just, sitting down at the buffet and feeding yourself till you can hardly walk, which is how a lot of powerlifting diets were, back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But we've kind of borrowed from the bodybuilding world to realize that there's actually a better way to eat, and your recovery is going to be better. That same 200 grams of protein per day broken up into smaller portions is going to be better than sitting there and trying to do two different 100-gram feedings. How do we know how much exactly, that's always a debate, how much protein can be utilized in a single sitting. And it probably varies by the person. I think probably big guys with tons of muscle can probably use a little bit more, but we do know that at some level, it's going to be better utilized, broken down into smaller feedings versus kind of those big giant force feedings. So, long story short, eating healthier, eating cleaner, really paying attention to both your macro and micronutrient profiles is going to lead to better workouts and better recovery, better sleep. So yeah, it's a win all the way around.
And I've noticed you on your podcast, was it the Baker Barbell podcast? Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You talked about like picking the right programming for you. And, we talked a little bit about diet. What about, how do you go about, picking the right program for individuals based on, their goals and maybe their level of fitness as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing right there is goals. What are your goals? Are you trying to, whether it's, so I kind of had my lifters categorized into different categories. So, starting with, let's say, strength athletes, and that I would categorize them into competitive or non-competitive. So some guys want to go down the route of competing in powerlifting. Some guys just want to get stronger on the squat, bench, and deadlift, or whatever lifts that they choose to focus on. A lot of people just do that because that's kind of what the internet or social media, or whatever, focus on: how much you bench, how much you deadlift, how much you squat, whatever. Mm-hmm. And those are as good a proxies as any for just overall general strength. But so is that your focus? Are you trying to lift bigger numbers? So that's one subcategory of clientele, strength focused. And then there's more of the muscle mass and physique type. I don't necessarily want to compete in bodybuilding, but I want to get as big and muscular and aesthetic as possible, including having, a lower body fat so that, I look great at the beach or the pool or whatever. So that's kind of the bodybuilding with a lower B crowd. And then I have my sport athletes. So the people that are using they're training, they're trying to build the strength and the muscle mass, but in order to apply it to something like a sport, with your high school and college athletes, it's obvious but I get adult clients that compete in, triathlons, various things or whatever, or even just recreational activities like, biking, hiking, camping, hunting and stuff like that, where you have to be in good physical shape. And then I've got my, my clients where we would just say, it's more about just broad-based general health and fitness, which obviously strength and building muscle is a large part of that. And usually that's the foundation for most people who are new to this. So to kind of at the beginning, deciding what category each of this potential client, this hypothetical client would fall into, and then designing programming for that person. Somebody who's just interested in general health and fitness, which is probably the bulk of my clients, and probably it's the bulk of most people's clients that are in this business, is that even if their goal is not necessarily to squat 500 pounds or bench 400 pounds or whatever, for the new person, for the novice that's new to this whole fitness thing, starting with a foundation of strength and muscle mass is usually the key. That's where I want to start them. If you're weak, if you're under muscled, everything else that you try to participate in is going to suffer. If you want to, and it doesn't mean we don't focus on trying to get their body fat down or whatever, if they're, overweight or whatever, but people need to start by trying to improve the amount of muscle mass that they have and the amount of just general baseline strength that they have. And that's true if you're an athlete, and the goal is to get faster on the track or the football field and prevent knee injuries or whatever. The foundation is still strength and muscle. If for somebody who's trying to, look awesome they want to look like a bodybuilder, lowercase b, at the beach or the pool or whatever for the summer season, the foundation is strength and muscle, right? It's like you can't tone and define muscle that you don't have, right? And so and then obviously for the strength side of it, it's the same thing. So for new people, their program is not going to look very different regardless of their goal, because it's just going to be a foundational basic strength and muscle building program. I'm fond of barbells. That's kind of my thing. Is that's what I coach. I coach people in the basic barbell lifts, the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, the overhead press, chin ups and pull ups, things like that. If they can do them, if not, then I'll use a limited amount of like machine based training and stuff like that. And then once we get them to a point, kind of once we kind of increase that baseline of just general strength, then we start to specialize a little bit more in whatever unique category they fit into. So as more of an intermediate trainee, that's where goal setting becomes really, really important. I kind of like it to, I liken it to education. I mean, when we start, we take this hypothetical person, we say, education is broad and basic at the beginning, right? You need to, and you need to learn the foundations. You need to learn how to read. You need to learn how to write. You need to learn how to do basic math. Like if you can't do those things, you're not going to be able to do anything more advanced. Mm-hmm. But then once, and then so you finish your secondary school, you get into college, it's even a little bit more of the basics, a little faster pace, a little bit more, but it's still, improving the reading, writing, and math. And then as you get further along, now you have to declare a major. Right. And then you have to start to specialize in that thing a little bit more. And you're using all of those skills that you built up. You're not going to be good at science or history or whatever it is that you specialize in if you don't have good reading skills and good writing skills. Like you have to be able to do all those things. So it's declare. And then, the further up the chain you go into the master's program, you go into your PhD, it gets even more and even more specialized. And so that's the way that I think it is with fitness as well, is that it's the same thing. It's at the beginning with most clients. Hey, we got to teach these people to read, write, and do basic math, regardless of what their goal is. They may want to be, you may have one kid that wants to be a PhD chemist and another one that wants to be a PhD in philosophy. They're all going to start at the same place, right? None of those people are going to get it if they can't read, write, and do basic math. And then as they get closer and closer, then we start to specialize even more in that, and what that looks like in practice. I mean, it's kind of hazy, right? It's,
would you say like someone just starting out, like total body, just, get through everything a little bit, just.
Yeah, I normally start people, when a new client comes into my gym, typical client is going to work with me 2 to 3 days per week. And so that's going to usually be 2 to 3 full body workouts per week. Right. That may change if, ideally I have people coming in and training like Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something, or, something Tuesday, Friday. So we've got some space in between. And in those situations, then 9 times out of 10, I'm going to start them with a basic full body program, which would be, and it kind of varies based on the person, because not everybody, especially with your older clients, not everybody can do the same movements with the same amount of proficiency as the next guy. But basically we're looking at, and this isn't, this is pretty much everybody agrees with this, you're some sort of squat, bench press, deadlift, or hinging pattern, overhead pressing, pull-ups, or a lat pull down or something like that, rowing movement. So just your basic movements. I'm normally 4 to 6 movements per workout, would be about right. Some of those are your, about half of those are your big basic compound movements, and then maybe a handful of smaller isolation type movements. But basically just sticking with the basics, 3, 4 at the max, 5 or 6 movements per workout. 2 to 3 days per week. And then what happens is over time, as that person gets stronger, those workouts start to become more fatiguing and they start to become more time consuming. So you can't dedicate the squats at the front end start to take longer to get through your warm-up sets and your work sets, and they start to become more fatiguing. And then the same thing with the bench presses and the deadlifts. And so what happens is you have to split those things up a little bit more if you want it to stay practical. Most people want to keep their workouts, about an hour or so. If you start needing to push the workout to an hour and a half or something like that, then typically it's time to split things up. And I'll usually go with just a basic upper body, lower body split. So, and that can be, again, anywhere from my preference is like 4 days a week. So, Monday, Thursday, upper body, Tuesday, Friday, lower body. Sometimes if I have a guy that likes to run or do sprints or something like that, then I may say like, okay, we're going to do upper body Monday and Friday. Wednesday, we're going to do your lower body, weight training workout. And then Saturday, you can go out and do your sprints or something like that. So that becomes like the second, because a lot of guys won't recover. Some people won't recover real well from loading up the lower body 2 days per week, especially if they're doing a lot of outside activity or whatever. So we'll vary it. And for women, it might be different. A lot of women who want to focus way more on their lower body, we may do lower body Monday and Friday and upper body on Wednesday or something like that. So, but it's usually an upper body, lower body split, is how, and then a lot of people are going to be fine to just stay with that basic structure for the rest of their training career. If somebody has more specific goals, whether it's physique oriented or whether it's like the strength sports or something like that, then there may be a need later on to split it up even more. And you could, that's where, like with the physique thing, you start to get into more of a body part split. So you may have, because you need more dedicated work on each area to continue to force adaptation, to continue to force growth. But there's usually, for like a raw beginner, there's not a reason for them to have an entire dedicated training session just for their arms, just to do bicep and tricep. But for a more advanced guy who's no longer getting any growth out of his arms with just doing the basics, the only way for him to get more growth from his arms may be to have a dedicated day just to train in biceps and triceps so that he can have full energy devoted to those movements, full recovery afterwards, and press those movements with more volume, more intensity, more effort level, that sort of thing. And so you're forced into a situation where you have to split the body up into body parts, or like in the case of powerlifting, into lifts. So you have a day more that's dedicated to, which is kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different emphasis. Bodybuilders are focused more on developing the individual muscle groups. Powerlifters are focused on bringing up specific movement patterns. So it winds up, in practice, sometimes it looks similar, but it's a slightly different philosophy behind it. But yeah, like in powerlifting, it would be, a day, maybe 2 days per week dedicated to bringing up the bench press, and 2 days per week dedicated to bringing up the squat and the deadlift, that sort of thing. So you're just specializing the split around that person's goals. But for the average client, what about
rep range? Like, do you typically, especially someone new, start with a higher rep range, just to get them accustomed to?
No, I don't. I start with new people. I generally start with like a 5, it depends on the exercise. For the basic barbell movements, squats, deadlifts, bench presses, things like that, I typically start people with 5 rep sets, but we start light. So when I say we're going to start you on day 1 with a set of 5, that's a set of 5 with the empty barbell. If they've never done squats before, I don't load them. So when I say a set of 5, that doesn't necessarily imply, 5 rep max on day 1. It's a set of 5 that they can do. And it's multiple sets also with that, with that weight. So it's a load that they can handle with good form. I don't want them on day 1. I don't want to push into failure or pushing max loads or anything like that. It's very much, you got to learn the mechanics, and you can't do that if the load is too high or the effort level is too high. If they're just starting with body weight only, like if someone comes in that's really deconditioned, I may start them with higher reps on like a body weight squat, versus like but if somebody's strong enough to do a barbell squat, like a 45-pound barbell on day 1, but they're not conditioned to it, like they haven't done anything in 20 years or whatever, the problem is 10, 12 rep sets on that will absolutely destroy them. They will be they'll be too sore to come in 48 hours later and do it again. And, just for, if there's people listening to this podcast that are, new, young personal trainers out there, do not do that to your clients on day 1 if you want to keep yourself in business. You don't want to wreck your clients on day 1. You want them to leave the gym thinking, okay, this is something I can do, not, oh my God, how am I going to survive this? Like, they will find a way out of it. So I feel like the lower rep sets are, especially on things like squats and deadlifts, the lower rep sets are far less likely to cause that extreme levels of soreness and things like that. The reality is, when it's a brand new client, it doesn't really matter what you do with that person. They're going to gain muscle and get stronger. Okay. So it's just, to a degree, it's a matter of preference. But then, on day 1, I may start them with a 45-pound bar. On day 2, it's 50 pounds. On day 3, it's 55 pounds. So we're just very conservatively, but at the same time, aggressively adding load to those 5 rep sets until all of a sudden, a few months in, that person who couldn't squat, who could barely squat the 45-pound bar is squatting, a 45-pound plate on each side, only a few months in. And those strength increases that people get on the very beginning, of a well-designed strength program, that's what we mean by laying the foundation. We're just getting them up to a baseline of strength to which they could, because people come in and they say, well, I want my legs and everything. I want it to look, they'll show me a picture of some girl on Instagram or something. It's like, well, I want to look like this, but I don't really care about strength. Well, it's like, but you're not going to look like this if you can't squat a 45-pound bar. You know what I mean? It's like this girl that you want to look like that you're showing me this picture of, she can squat 225, so you're not going to look like that until you can do what and that's the thing with like physique or even health or whatever, like the weight on the bar. The problem is that's the only real metric that we have day to day. It's not, yes, there's sets and reps and all that kind of stuff, but it's hard to measure. You can't measure increases in muscle mass day to day, week to week. It's too slow, but you can measure performance. And so, having something in place, and whether it's, somebody that squats 100 pounds for a set of 5, that next workout, they need to be doing 105 pounds, or they need to be doing 100 for a set of 6, but something needs to go up. And I think a lot of people make that mistake if they kind of focus on the outcome. They want to look a certain way or whatever. But they don't realize that the way to get there is really meticulously tracking your performance one workout to the next and making sure that you're moving something up, because that's the only way that you're going to get those increases in muscle mass or increases in strength, is really trying to track all those details and make sure that that something is going up workout to workout, or at least week to week.
Yeah. When you say something going up, you either mean sets, or, well, not necessarily sets, but probably just overall volume, perhaps. Yeah,
so you can use sets. I don't think that's the best way to increase. Like if somebody's doing 3 sets, it kind of depends. Like if we're talking about muscle hypertrophy, then I'm either wanting to do 2 things. If the goal is to increase muscle mass in this person, I'm either wanting to have them do more load for the same amount of reps. So let's just say they were doing 3 sets of 5. If they did 3 sets of 5 with 100 pounds on a given exercise, I either want them to do 3 sets of 5 with 105 pounds. So we maintained our volume, but we increased the intensity, or 3 sets of 6 at 100 pounds. So we did the same weight, but we did it for a few more reps. Now, could you just increase the number of sets? So instead of doing 3 sets of 5 at 100, could you just do 4 sets of 5? I think you can. I don't think that's the most effective way to program for muscle mass. I think because there's always, to a degree, there's always just, I can rest a little longer and I can always just add another set. Whereas increasing a rep that I did within that set is more indicative of a performance increase, in my opinion. And so is load.
What about rest? Would you say, you've heard, depending on probably the weight or the amount of reps that you're doing?
So and I think anecdotally, we've known this, people that train seriously for strength, but more and more of the literature is starting to support that there is very, very little, if bordering on no evidence, that extremely short rest periods are beneficial for anything other than directly training for muscular endurance. Okay. So that for someone looking to increase muscle size or strength, that set to set, more rest is better. Now, how much rest? I think anecdotally, we look at 2 minutes being the absolute minimum between a hard set. Now, if you're just kind of bullshitting your way up to your warm-up sets, you can kind of as fast as but once you get into your heavier work sets, we're looking at, a minimum of 2 minutes, but really for a more advanced person and on a hard exercise, like a hard leg exercise, 3 to 5, 3 to 5 minutes. That's one of the problems with, heavy, hard, effective strength training, especially like in a commercial setting, is the workouts take a long time. They can, if you let that get away from you, but you do need to track them. Because you need to keep them consistent. I would tell people, if nothing else, even if you're resting not enough, even if you're saying, I'm capping everything at 2 minutes, which I would say is not enough for hard, for hard sets on big fatiguing exercises, it needs to be the same all the time across workouts, because that's a huge variable that if you don't control for it, it's going to skew your performance. Because today, if I'm taking 5 minutes between sets, if it's Saturday afternoon and I got nothing to do, and I'm in there doing my squats and I'm taking 5 minutes between sets and I have a great workout, but then, the next time I squat later in the week, I'm in a rush because I got to pick up the kids from school and I cut my rest time down to a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And I can't get the same amount of weight. My performance decreased by 50%. And I go, well, what happened? I got weaker. No, you didn't get weaker. You didn't control your rest time. So it's skewing your performance. If you need to cut your rest time down to a minute or 2 minutes because of some outside thing, reduce the load on the bar, or do a different exercise, but don't expect you to perform the same way under those circumstances. Track coaches do this when you're training for max output on certain things. Track coaches have traditionally used a similar format where it's like, I think it's something like a minute of like a minute of rest
or something.
Yeah. Or like a minute of rest per 10 meters, something like that. So like max effort 100-meter, if you have a higher level track athlete doing a max effort 100-meter dash, you're probably going to rest him about 10 minutes before you do another one, because if you go less than that, he could still do it, but he's running slow because he's tired and now he's not training speed. And people don't get that. There's a difference between training speed and training conditioning. And that's the same thing with strength is if you cut your rest times way down and the weight is having to come down or the amount of reps that you can do, now you're not training strength because you're working with submaximal loads because of fatigue. So when you're trying to train for strength, you need to give yourself enough rest between sets to make sure that you're capable of max force output. And that's typically why over time we talked about splitting workouts up into, going from full body to upper lower to a body part split, or to breaking things down into just having a day where you focus on bench, just having a day where you focus on squat. That becomes practical necessity as much as physiological, because you just can't do all of those big barbell lifts in a single session and still adhere to those rest periods. It takes too long. And you're in the gym for 2 hours or more, and most people don't have or don't want to do, including me. I don't want to be in the gym that long, and so you're going to have a scenario where but I would encourage people, change your training up rather than your rest periods. Don't say I'm going to rest a minute between sets just so I can do more exercises. Like, do it right. If you're going to squat or deadlift or bench, or like, do it right and take your rest periods between sets. And then if you want to move on to your smaller, I would say less important, but your accessory type movements, you can push the pace a little bit more on those. You can cut those things down to like 2 or 3 minutes or things like that. So, but yeah, there's really no evidence that 30-second rest, that was a thing in bodybuilding for a long time, which was, 30 seconds, 60-second rest. There's some application with that for muscular endurance. Certainly like in the bodybuilding world back in the day, it was all about the pump. It was just how big of a pump you're going to get a big pump, but there's also not a whole lot of evidence that the pump is the leading cause of muscle growth. There's really some evidence that it doesn't have that much at all to do with muscle growth at all. I don't necessarily believe that, but I don't think it's the primary contributor to muscle growth. I think increases in load over time is the primary driver of muscle growth. So if you want to get bigger, you need to get stronger. I always tell my clients, look, if you want to get bigger, you want to get your legs bigger, you're squatting 200 pounds for a set of 5 today. And a year from now, you're squatting 200 pounds for a set of 5. You're not going to have grown. I don't care what else you do. You're not going to have gotten any bigger. So like if you're squatting 200 pounds today, at this time next year, you need to be squatting 250, or whatever that number is. That's the only real metric we have that I don't want to say but more or less guarantees muscle growth has occurred, because it's rare that you're going to really go up in strength like that without also having built up muscle mass. And so that has to be accounted for.
Yeah. And I love the point about tracking your rest periods. It's something that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot, right?
Doesn't get talked about at all.
No.
Yeah. No. But it needs to be held. It needs to, just like lots of things need to be held constant in training, and people focus. I think that's one of those things where people there's a lot of things they just don't realize the amount of things that need to be standardized in training so that you can adequately track performance. Even the days of, your rest period between sets, but the amount of rest time between exercises. If you squat on Monday and then you squat on Thursday or Friday, you're probably okay. But if your schedule changes and you squat this week on Monday and then you squat again on Wednesday, well, now you're doing it on 48 hours rest instead of your normal 72 or 96. Well, that's different. Like, you're going to have to account for that. So, but a lot of people are surprised. They're like, oh, wow, I didn't, so that, standardizing your form, so that not only is your form safe and efficient, but also that you can track. A lot of people will do this again, we'll say with squats, is that, I teach a squat that is at or slightly below parallel. Right.
I was actually just going to ask you.
Right.
Yeah. Cause you hear differing things.
Yeah.
On that.
So, yeah. And some of it's application towards the goal or whatever, but that's, again, it's one, you have to, whatever you decide. If you say, okay, that's bunk, I'm not going to have clients squat below parallel. Okay, fine. I'll argue with you about that separately, but whatever it is that you decide is the optimal depth needs to be standardized regardless. So right. If I'm going to teach my client to squat about an inch below parallel, and that's, if I'm looking at a client from the side, I want to see the crease of their hip, even with or just below the top of their knee. That's like in powerlifting, that's a powerlifting legal squat. That's the criteria that they use. So I use the same thing in my gym, and there's reasons for that. And that I think it's a way that maximizes the amount of weight that can be lifted and also the amount of muscle that is trained. Okay. So going significantly below that or above that, I think you lose that combination of both muscle that can be trained and also load that can be used. So that's why I like that, but that's a separate issue. In that, if that's where I tell my client, okay, this is where we're going to squat to, that needs to be done at every workout. So if he does 200 pounds for a set of 5, 1 inch below parallel, and then at 210, he's at parallel. And then at 220, he's a half inch above parallel. And then at 230, he's 1 or 2 inches above parallel,
right.
And then at 250, he's doing a half squat. Did he get stronger? No, he just shortened up his stroke. Right. And so that the form has to be standardized as well. And that goes for all exercises. That goes on a bicep curl. If you're doing a 50-pound curl, super, super strict for a set of 10, but then you get to a 60-pound curl and you're, leaning back and using your hips and all that. Did you get stronger, or did you just bastardize your form in order to lift more weight? So you can't gauge your performance increases if the form and the technique is not standardized across the board. Yeah. So you want to look at, you obviously want to have good form and technique, both for safety and for efficiency, so that the exercise actually works as it should, but also as a metric to measure, to making sure you are actually progressing and you're not just, shortening up your squat depth or introducing all these momentum and all these kind of things in order to get more weight. But I see that all the time. Guys will be like, oh, look, I put 100 pounds on my squat this year. And it's like, yeah, but you also shaved off about 4 inches of depth. Yeah. So I'm not really sure that you got stronger at all, So
what about
maybe you did, but you don't know.
What about, the eccentric and the tempo of the lift? Because that can play a role as well, right?
Yeah. So, and yes. And so, on a bench press, if you're talking about, letting the weight drop and bounce off the chest and that sort of thing, and bringing the hips up off the bench and all that kind of stuff. On most of my exercises, the way that I teach my clients is that I don't want to do super slow eccentrics, but I want a controlled eccentric.
Yeah. Like
mainly because,
something
like that, and you just kind of watch it. I may not tell them to actually count because I don't want them to have too many things going on in their head. They're trying to focus on their form and count their reps and, count their eccentrics and all that. So I will have them count, if I do pauses or things like that, I have them do, count their pauses and that sort of thing. But I generally want to have good eccentric control so that they're in control of the movement, that they are in control at the end of the movement, especially for safety reasons. You don't want to, especially for stronger guys, you don't want guys dropping fast into the bottom of a squat. That sort of thing is very, that's where you see tendons get ruptured and things like that. So you want people to ease down under control into the bottom of movements, emphasize the stretch position of most movements. If there's a stretch component, I like to see that emphasized. I think that actually plays a role in hypertrophy. I think that stretch under load actually is a factor that contributes to muscle growth. But I also think, like for my my general fitness clients or whatever who have multiple goals. Usually, especially for the older ones, one of the goals that they'll want to, they want to build strength and build muscle and all that, but they also will talk about mobility. Well, how do I increase mobility? Well, full range of motion weightlifting is a great way. It's a great mobility exercise. It's a lot of times now you can do mobility work or stretching and all that kind of stuff if you want outside of the gym. But one of the best things you can do for yourself is, a full range of motion squat. The best stretch for the squat is the squat, and so continuously practicing full range of motion, emphasizing that stretch under load is a really great mobility exercise for a lot of people. Doing things like for my older clients who almost universally have poor shoulder mobility, doing things, full range of motion lat pull downs, making them control the eccentric, really going up overhead, letting that weight pull them gently into that full stretch position, holding that pause for a beat or two, and then coming back down is a great way to teach that exercise to like an older person with mobility issues, because you're getting the strengthening and the muscle building portion, but you're also getting a really, really good mobility movement as well. So, eccentric control I can't really think of a movement where I don't teach eccentric control, and I think I don't necessarily buy into the fact that eccentrics, like that was kind of, years ago, it was the paradigm was that all muscle growth was primarily driven by muscle damage. So the more you damage the muscle, the more it would grow back. And I think what we're seeing now is that that's not necessarily the case. That the mechanism,
meaning you don't have to be crazy sore to
right. And so eccentric loading makes you more sore. Like there's a significant amount of, like, if you really want to torture somebody, have them do really slow tempo, heavy squats or things like that. Like you can make people really sore by maximizing, the eccentrics, or doing a lot of eccentric only movement. And so eccentrics were something that was more, you saw talked about a little bit more, because the level of soreness, and people associated soreness with growth. The more sore that you got, the more you would grow. I think soreness is likely an unavoidable part of training in a way that's going to cause you to grow, but that the soreness in and of itself and the muscle damage in and of itself is not what is causing the growth. They're co-conspirators. They're along for the ride. You can't train in a way, I think what we're seeing now is that producing high levels of mechanical tension and progressive overload, that's the primary driver of hypertrophy, of muscle mass gains, but that over time, you can't continue to progressively overload the muscle. You can't continuously force the muscle to reach high levels of mechanical tension without also creating muscle damage and soreness. So, but that we're not necessarily just trying to beat the shit out of the muscle and see how sore we can make people. That's not necessarily the right way to go about it.
But you can build muscle and get stronger without being sore.
You can, yeah. Okay. I would definitely agree, and I think I think that's a big goal of the clients that I train. The things that make people sore, let me back up a little bit, but the way to not get sore, and I think to some degree, if you're going to seriously pursue strength or bodybuilding, you're going to learn to live with a little bit of mild soreness, but you're not going to wake up after every squat day with debilitating delayed onset soreness where you can barely walk. I mean, I've been training now for 30 years and I'm pretty much used to a muscle always being sore somewhere on my body. I mean, I kind of like it in a way. I feel like it's probably more psychological than anything, but I feel like, I did enough, but if I'm insanely sore, then I look at, is my recovery maybe not so great? Because there are things that you can do, like when your nutrition is shitty, you're not hydrating, you have too much alcohol, things like that will increase muscle soreness. So sometimes if I'm more sore than normal, but I didn't really change much in my workout, then if I'm more sore than normal, I kind of look at my recovery patterns and say, maybe I'm not really doing great on my nutrition, hydration, sleep, whatever it is. But that being said, on the training part of it, the way that you mitigate against soreness is one, not changing the workouts up all the time. Again, the Weider principle of muscle confusion, where every time we do legs, we have to do totally different movements, totally different workout, constantly change rep ranges, exercises, volume, all that kind of stuff. That will keep you sore. And I think, again, that type of principle of constant change, constant variability that leads to soreness was associated with that paradigm of muscle soreness is what makes the muscle grow. And so if you believe that, then yeah, you would train in a way that always made you sore, because what people will find is that once you kind of get into a workout, like let's say, you've got your workout A and workout B, and they don't change that much, week to week. Once you get through the first week or two of doing that, you're not going to get sore anymore, especially if you're smartly, and conservatively increasing the stress. So you're going up in weight, yes, but not by much. We're talking about 2 to 5 pound increases in weight, every couple of weeks or whatever. Or we may increase the rep range, but by a little bit. We're going from 3 sets of 5 to 3 sets of 6. We're not going from 3 sets of 5 to 3 sets of 12.
Right.
So if all those variables, all those metrics are more or less kept the same workout to workout, but then you're just conservatively progressing that, you're not going to get all that sore. When you tend to get sore once you've been doing this for a number of years, the current workout that you're doing you're going to get stagnant on it. And you may find that you're not seeing any progression like you used to, like you're not seeing any new muscle growth. Your strength levels aren't going up. So your performance isn't increasing, or you start to get some aches and pains associated with doing the same movements over and over again. And so you go, okay, well, I think it's maybe time to change up my routine. And so you change out exercises, or you make bigger adjustments to the rep ranges. Well, then what happens? You're sore, right? Because it's new. And that's just part of it, though. I mean, if you're going to lift weights, there's no way around occasional soreness, but there's no argument to be made for constantly being sore, and if you're constantly sore, I would say either your recovery is bad or your workload is too high, because there is a certain amount of work that any of us can do that we can't recover from, no matter if our nutrition is perfect, our sleep is perfect, our hydration is perfect. There is a certain threshold that you can cross that you cannot recover from. And so the main thing to look for, soreness is one thing, but also performance. If your weights, you're squatting on Monday and then you're going in next Monday to squat again, and you're still feeling it from the previous week, your workload is probably too high. So you should be able to demonstrate a performance increase day to day, week to week, especially as a beginner. So, you need to dial that back, and performance is always going to be a better metric than soreness or muscle damage. That's what's really going to matter. Are my lifts, is my performance going up week to week, day to day? That's always the key to muscle growth or increased performance, not how sore am I. Although soreness may be a part of, continuing to do this for a long period of time. There's going to be times where you get sore, for sure. Introducing a new movement, if you've been just deadlifting for the first 6 months of training, first year of training, and then I introduce you to a Romanian deadlift. Well, the Romanian deadlift it more directly stresses the hamstrings than a deadlift does, where in a deadlift, the hamstrings are sharing the load a lot more with the quads. But now in the Romanian deadlift, now the hamstrings are doing much more of the work on their own. They're going through a much longer range of motion, and there's a greater eccentric component to that movement. So guess what? You're going to feel a lot of soreness in the hamstrings, and that can be a useful thing. And that, at least for the first workout or two, is, did we get the movement right? Because if I have somebody do a Romanian deadlift or a good morning or something like that for the first time, and the next day they feel nothing in their hamstrings, or they didn't feel anything in their hamstrings during the workout, I could potentially look at that as, well, maybe the mechanics weren't exactly right, because you should be sore after doing that. And so that's not necessarily the goal of the workout, but it is potentially an indicator that the mechanics were correct in stressing the right muscle group, versus I woke up and I didn't feel anything in my hamstrings, but my lower back was really sore. Well, yeah, RDLs will cause a little bit of lower back soreness. But it should mainly be a hamstring type movement. And so soreness patterns can be a useful thing to indicate effective training stimulus, but it's not the goal of the training session. Once we do that first workout of an RDL and you do, 50 pounds for a set of 5 or whatever, then the goal now is not to get you sore again. It's to do 55 for 5 and then 60 for 5 and then 60, that's the goal. And whatever soreness is associated with that is what it is. But the more that you do it, the less the soreness is generally going to be.
That's good stuff, Andy. I'm thinking, we're getting up on time. I'm like, well, maybe we'll do a part 2 down the road a little bit.
Sure. No, I'm good on time. I don't know if you have any other questions or anything. I'm
yeah,
okay,
no,
so.
I mean, this was good. I think we hit a lot.
Yeah.
I always ask this. I'll ask you one last question, then we'll end it here. But what one tip would you give someone that maybe is looking to get their body back to what it once was, maybe, 5, 10, 15 years ago? What one tip would you give that individual?
So what I normally, when I start with I always tell people if you're in bad shape, if you're kind of and I'm not necessarily, again, I think I'm not necessarily talking to somebody who's fit, but maybe just wants to, lose a little belly fat or whatever, but somebody who's in a bad state, which is a lot of the clients that I start with. They're obviously not fit, but their health is in a bad place. Physical, psychological, mental health is on a bad place because because their physical health is so bad. Is I usually have people really commit to starting one thing and stopping one thing, and try and identify, and you want to make those like this. So the starting one thing, if you're not doing anything now, the starting of the one thing is usually going to be an exercise related thing. Although it could be a nutrition thing. It could be, I'm going to start eating 3 servings of vegetables per day. But usually the starting is going to be an exercise related thing. And I usually like that first thing to be something that's an extremely low barrier to clear, that doesn't require cost. It doesn't require you to schedule appointments with people. And I'm saying this as a guy that owns a gym and is a personal trainer that wants you to come and see me at some point, right?
Sure.
But I usually tell people, look, walk every day for 30 minutes. If you're not doing anything now, like there is nothing stopping you from opening your front door and walking for 30 minutes. If you're in Chicago and it's sub-zero temperatures or whatever, okay, fine. Go buy a $30 a month membership to the gym that has a treadmill and I don't know what you people do that live up there.
I'm walking with my dogs no matter the temperatures. So
yeah. And I pretty much tell people that here in Houston, when I got older people that are on, maybe it's not good advice for the trainer to tell them to walk in 105 in the middle of July, but hey, if that means you got to get up at 5 a.m. when it's 85 and not 105, then that's what you do, but it's start something and do it consistently, and it needs to be, you want it to be a low barrier, but you don't want it to be so small that it doesn't have an impact. Right. It's not, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to every Saturday or something like, 30, like walk 30 minutes a day. If you're not doing anything now, do that for 3 months, and then you can start something else after that. And at the same time, on that day one, we're going to start one thing and we're also going to stop one thing. Again, it can't be I'm going to, stop having chocolate cake. Like, well, how often do you have chocolate cake? Once a month? Like that's not going to, like, you got to find something that we're doing every day that's having a huge negative impact on your health that we're going to stop. And for usually what I'll look at people, the first thing I'll look at is alcohol. What's your drinking habits like? Are you down in a bottle of wine per night? Are you drinking a 6-pack a night? That's the first thing that we're going to stop, because that's going to have a big physical impact, not just in the reduction of calories, but getting all that shit out of their head. And it's going to get them, and maybe for some people, it's not to abstain from it completely. That may be a big, and you don't want to, as a trainer, you don't want to get into being a counselor necessarily, but they do overlap. But maybe, if you're at a bottle of wine every night, maybe it's a glass per night. I'm going to stop drinking that bottle of wine. I'm going to start, maybe instead of drinking that 6 or 12 pack every night, I'm going to have 1 beer at night, or I'm going to only drink on Friday and Saturday. But we got to start one thing and we got to stop one thing.
Love that.
And they got to be big, but they got to be simple, and they got to go on for 12 weeks. And at the end of 12 weeks, they will have seen a difference. They will have seen, and then that's going to give them a ton of momentum, physically and mentally, emotionally, to move into the next level of things, to actually get on they're going to trust that it actually works. A lot of people, it's amazing how many people don't believe that diet and exercise actually works. And it's weird. I mean, our industry in a way sells that to people. Oh, diet and exercise don't work for you. Try this. Like, no, that's such bullshit. I mean, diet and exercise literally works for everybody. There's no scenario where improvements in there aren't positive. And so, getting people the mental and the physical headspace to then make a bigger change to actually, okay, get on a more solid regimented nutrition plan. Okay, actually get into a gym and maybe hook up with a trainer or get into a more structured class thing. They'll be in a better place to do that. So yeah, that's what I usually tell people too.
I like the way you say that. Start something and end something, and it has to be somewhat significant. And for 12 weeks, and like you said, the walking. I talk about walking so much on this podcast. It's ad nauseum, but I agree.
Yeah, and I always tell people that people will almost create their own obstacles to like starting that, and they're like, well, I don't have a step counter. I need to go get an Apple Watch or what. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't need to count your steps. Like that's good. Like but like literally pick a physical destination. I'm just going to walk to the light post that's at the end of my street and back. Like it can be totally arbitrary, or 30 minutes. I'm going to walk 15 minutes in one direction. And then when I hit 15 minutes, I'm going to turn around and walk back. Like, you don't need to go out and buy new clothes. You don't need to go buy an Apple Watch. You don't need to do all these things. But they will do that. They'll say, well, I got to do this, and this before I start this. And I'm like, with walking, all you need to do is walk out your front door right now. Like, that's it. Walk out your front door right now and go on a walk. You don't need to do that's why I always generally start with walking, because there's really no excuses to be made other than potentially the weather, depending on where you live. But other than that, there's so many gyms now that, I mean, I don't have a lot of cardio equipment in my gym. So I have clients, like there's gyms all over us that are $30 a month or whatever, that are just basically a few weight equipment but just bikes, rows of bikes and treadmills that aren't being used.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, it's so simple,
Good stuff, Andy.
All right.
Best place for people to find you, your website?
My website, andybaker.com, or my Instagram, which is @Baker Barbell.
Awesome. Well, a lot of great knowledge shared today. So I appreciate you coming on and dropping all that for us.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, no doubt. Have a great day.
All right. You too. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there, and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangrin.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again, and have a great day.